Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today virtually. I wish I could see you all in person, but at least this gets us connected. So I'm Stefaní Šajr, and I'm an associate professor in special education and clinical sciences here at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the JASPER model, or Joint Attention, Symbolic Play, Engagement, and Regulation. What is the approach? What is some of our research evidence? And then some considerations for implementation. All right, before we get started, some disclosures. So I am a co-author on our JASPER intervention manual, and then I do receive funding from a couple of federal sources in the United States to pursue research that includes the JASPER intervention. I have a lot of really lovely collaborators some of whom are represented here, but many more to acknowledge. Dr. Connie Kazari in particular, who you may all know already, is the developer of the JASPER intervention. We came to know each other because I was her graduate student and postdoc many moons ago, it feels like, and we continue to work together on some JASPER related projects. And so thanks to her, some of the initial slides that you'll see in regards to the JASPER approach are from our JASPER training materials. So great thanks to her for sharing those. And then other lovely folks that you'll see here, Dr. Wendy Shi, Dr. Yachi Chang, our great JASPER collaborators, and then some folks represented on the right-hand side, Dr. John Seeley, Beth Stormshack, and Danny Almiral have all really helped to inform some of the research that we've been doing here on JASPER alongside our community partners that you can see on the right. All right, so what is JASPER? So JASPER is what we call a naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention, or NDBI. It kind of sits under that piece of the umbrella and spectrum of different early intervention models and approaches in autism. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We think of it as a targeted but comprehensive social communication intervention that you could think of as a module. So this can be kind of plopped in amongst children's other services. You don't have to do this in isolation, but in our context, we're typically seeing kids who are in school and who have other services. And of course, we want them to continue all of those great things to enhance their development and their learning. So across JASPER research, you'll see that children are receiving other services. And so we're looking for an impact of JASPER kind of above and beyond what kids are receiving in their communities. And in terms of research, we typically see JASPER short term. So in about 3 months, 10 to 12 weeks, we should be seeing change for kids, since that's what we're seeing in our research studies. Okay, so in terms of that naturalistic developmental and behavioral piece, what does that kind of look like in JASPER? So in terms of naturalistic, we're thinking of hands-on activities as the context for our interaction between the child and typically one adult, although there are other adaptations of JASPER where we have multiple children. We might have parents, educators involved. Anyway, around this, we're setting up some active activity where we have some objects. So that can be in the context of play with toys. It can also be in the context of kind of daily routines that children are doing with their families. If you're thinking about mealtime, bath time, getting the mail, feeding the pets, all those kinds of daily activities that families are doing. We're looking at play skills then not only as the context of playing with objects and somebody else, but also as a target for the intervention. So we're looking to see an increase in the diversity or number of different ways that kids are playing, and then also advancing through the developmental sequence or complexity of their play skills. And so we really emphasize that adults have an equal and active role in this interaction. So you can think of it like a conversation where there's this back and forth, 50-50, rather than me 100% talking at you. We would be going back and forth and taking some turns. So if I am with this child, I am both playing and talking with the child, and we're going back and forth like a conversation. In terms of the developmental piece, this is pretty central to JASPER, that our targets, how we assess them, and then how we identify what the child can do right now, what's their kind of mastered level of the skill, and then what's their next step is rooted in the developmental sequence, what we understand of how those different skills emerge in early childhood. And so we are looking to figure out where are kids right now, and then help them support them into that next level of complexity and build their skills in each of these different core domains that we'll talk about in a minute. And then in terms of behavioral, we're looking at challenging behavior dysregulation that might happen to understand what might be the function of that behavior, and then to support children to increase their regulation, to stay regulated for longer periods of time, and then to get into that regulated state more frequently in the context of, yes, it's play, but it's a lot of demand for our little ones, right? They're having to focus both on the materials and with their partner. They're having to communicate, they're having to share materials, they're having to come up with new ideas and act on the objects. So all of those things together in that interaction is a lot for a lot of our little ones. So often we need some strategies to support their regulation to help them stay engaged in that interaction. Okay, so again, we think of JASPER as this module, comprehensive social communication intervention that you could use for a period of time, maybe start and stop. You might use it sequentially, and you might use it in the context of a lot of other services that are happening for the child. Important to JASPER is that across those different skills that we're working on, we're really looking for children's spontaneous initiations of skills. So many of our kids can become excellent responders. The adult gives an instruction, the child knows how to respond. What can be more challenging is helping our kids to spontaneously tell us about their ideas or show us something new in the play. So central to our outcomes that we'll talk about, these are spontaneous skills that are generated by the child, not elicited by the adult. So what are those skills? So we're looking across these different domains, kind of fundamental building blocks for all young children. First, thinking about engagement, so helping kids get connected to their partner, as well as this shared activity. And so we refer to that as being jointly engaged. They're coordinating partner and shared activity, rather than perhaps focusing on just the partner, maybe singing a song or playing a game, or just the object, where they get really intensely focused on the object, and you could be there or not, but they're really noticing the object. So we want them to be able to notice both of those things, both you and that shared activity. We're thinking about play skills. So again, helping kids increase the diversity and the complexity of their play. We're thinking about their social communication. So that's where that joint attention piece comes in. So different functions of social communication to share socially, joint attention, also for requesting if that's a target for this particular child. And then thinking about the different modalities in which you could communicate. So we could use gaze, gesture, spoken language, augmented language if you're using an AAC system. So supporting all of those different types of ways of communicating. And then again, children's regulation. So helping them to stay calm, cool, and able to engage in the interaction. All right. So why these specific early core areas of development? So for joint attention, based on early experimental work, some of which was done by Dr. Kazri, her mentor, Marion Sigmund, and others, have demonstrated that children with autism show us fewer joint attention skills than their typically developing peers. But we know that those early gestures in particular, showing something, pointing to something, giving something just because you want to share it with somebody else, are really central to language development. So we want to help get those early gestures moving on the path to greater language. In terms of play skills, we also see that play can be also a little bit more challenging for our little ones on the spectrum. So oftentimes we see kids with what we would call functional play skills. So they're doing really well with building and stacking, maybe extending familiar actions to themselves, like pretending to drink from a cup, or taking a brush to their hair, but it's trickier for them to get into that symbolic level of play, which has a level of abstraction that's a little more challenging. So we're pretending something is other than what it is. So I'm pretending that my pen is an airplane and I'm flying it, or I'm taking on a role and pretending to be a different character, or I'm giving the dinosaur life and I'm tromping through the city and eating the people, doing all sorts of things. So those symbolic level skills are kind of the top of that developmental hierarchy of play. And often we see that kids need a little bit more support to get to that symbolic level of play. And then also to connect that to someone else. So to share in that play collaboratively with someone else. And what can be tricky is that for a lot of our kiddos, we see just less diversity in their play. They're really expert in specific ideas and specific ways to play that are often linked to their really specific interests, which is great. You have those awesome skills. They are expert in those skills, but we're looking to broaden that out a little bit more. And in part because we're looking for kids to be successful with their peers. And you may find someone else who wants to play the exact same type of game or really loves trains and wants to make lots of different scenarios around trains with you. But likely your peers might want to talk about something else or play with something else. And so to help our kids be even more successful in those social interactions, helping to broaden out some new types of play to give more options and variety in playing with peers. All right, and then engagement. So we think of engagement really as the foundation for learning, this kind of state of connection, again, where I'm noticing that social partner and the things that we're playing together. And so this, we know, this particular state of joint engagement is linked to increases in children's initiation of joint attention skills, so those early gestures that we talked about, and then also their language learning. So that state uniquely is predictive of language. And that's why we want to help our kids just spend more and more time connected in that state. In terms of regulation, again, we're helping kiddos stay regulated for longer periods of time and more frequently so that they're just better able to access the learning environment, be that in our session or perhaps in this case, in a classroom. All right, so why are we focusing on these core early areas of development? And you may have twigged into this already, that we're really focused on language outcomes. So one of the few predictors of social outcomes that we know to date is having phrase speech by the time you reach, for us in our context, entry into school, which is about 5 to 6 years old. So having phrase speech by age 5 leads to our best social outcomes for people with autism. So how can we get there? Again, each of those different core domains. So we do have research saying that there's an important link between developing those early skills, be that initiations of joint attention, time jointly engaged, diversity and complexity of play skills are predictive of these bigger skills like language and cognitive development. All right, so can we improve those early core skills? And so this was the initial study, which kind of took the joint attention and symbolic play pieces separately. So it looks a little different than what you would come to know as JASPER today, but this was Dr. Khazri's kind of first foray here. And so the idea here is that if we had some specific and brief time, so 30 minutes a day for 6 weeks, targeting joint attention skills or targeting symbolic play skills in contrast to a group of kiddos who aren't receiving either one. So they continue in their regular program. Kids across all of these 3 groups are receiving an intensive ABA-based classroom program for 30 hours a week. So those in the control group continue to receive that, as do those in the joint attention and symbolic play groups. They're just receiving this extra 30 minutes a day for 6 weeks of that targeted intervention. Okay, So in these figures, you can see those three different groups. So that solid line with the kind of diamonds is the joint attention group, the gray line with the little squares, the symbolic play group, and then the triangle dotted line is the control. And so across those three pictures, you can see that that control group is the lowest of those three groups when we're looking at teaching initiations of joint attention, or we're looking at the level of the children's play skills. Looks like everybody's growing over time, but those who are getting the little brief targeted joint attention or symbolic play interventions are making significantly greater gains than those in the control. And you see a similar kind of picture and pattern when we look at language development. And an interesting finding that the children who had the more limited language skills when they entered the study actually did better in this joint attention intervention. But again, both joint attention and symbolic play making greater gains than the control. So why might we see similar findings across the joint attention and symbolic play groups? You might think that, okay, if we target symbolic play in the symbolic play group, they should do the best in play. And if we target joint attention in the JA group, they should do the best in joint attention and much better than the symbolic play kiddos. But we see that the secret sauce for both of those groups might be that idea of getting kids connected, that foundation of time jointly engaged, for getting kids connected to that adult partner in this case, and their shared activity, that they're showing us that they're making gains across both joint attention and play skills. And so this was part of the rationale to bring the joint attention and symbolic play intervention components together, because both are leading to change in both of these outcomes. So engagement might be the most important intervention target for us to make change in these other core areas of early development. So we got to get kids connected and engaged first so that we can work on some of those other skills. So how do we successfully get kids engaged? And so play is one way that we can do that, supporting that connection in the context of what should be a fun and relatively natural activity where we can then work on the frequency, diversity, and complexity of, yes, children's play skills, but then also their communication. All right, so why would we focus on play? Why would we teach play? In part because it is developmentally appropriate for our younger kiddos. So all kids are learning lots of skills through play. They're building language. There's the opportunity for a lot of ongoing problem solving as the tower maybe that you're trying to build here isn't working just the way you would like it. Lots of different opportunities to problem solve and to perhaps then be flexible with what it is that you were building or intending to build, or imagining something different, and then developing some of those symbolic skills in addition to these great functional skills like building. Okay, so that's a little bit of an intro. We'll get into a little bit more of the science and thinking about implementation as well. So for JASPER, yes, it started in the clinic. And since then, in those early studies, has moved into a lot of different community locations, be that families' homes or in school contexts with educators or into community agencies where clinicians of all types of backgrounds are delivering the intervention as part of public health services. And so across these different contexts, we want to understand if the intervention is feasible to implement, and then how well are we doing it as the adults who are learning to deliver the intervention? What does our fidelity of implementation look like? What does adoption look like across these different agencies? Are these practices sustaining over time, etc.? But we still also want to know in tandem if, as we're implementing and adapting in these different contexts, does the intervention still work for kids? Are we still seeing those different outcomes and movement in those outcomes that we have been talking about. And so some of the different adaptations that you'll see to the JASPER model. So the original is the therapist-mediated or clinician-child model. And then there are other adaptations that have been tested since. One being a caregiver-mediated model, where the child's caregiver learns the entirety, if they like, of the JASPER strategies, and they are coached to deliver that with their child. We have teacher-mediated models, which can come in different forms, where it can be that educators in some settings are delivering, again, the full package intervention, learning the entire intervention and delivering it one-on-one or 1-2, 1-3. Alternatively, looking at how we can embed some of our JASPER strategies into their existing classroom curriculum that they're delivering each day. And then the other adaptation, kind of tied a lot to that classroom work, is thinking about getting kids connected to their peers. So what do these sessions look like? Well, in our research studies, typically a JASPER session is about 30 to 60 minutes long. That's going to depend on the child's age, if we're looking at infants and toddlers versus preschool and school-age kiddos, and then also their needs. For our school-age children who we would consider minimally verbal, so for us that means they're coming into our studies with less than 20 spontaneous different words, and they're 5 to 8 years old. Typically those sessions are a little bit longer, or we're aiming to get build up to hour-long sessions. How many sessions are we doing? About 2 to 5 times per week. Lots of our studies are 2 to 3 times a week. Again, some of those focusing on our school-age children who are minimally verbal would be occurring more frequently, up to 5 times a week, typically for up to that 3-month marker. Often, JASPER's delivered one-on-one, but again, we do have adaptations where it looks different than that, especially for classroom settings, and then occurs in a number of different settings. So across studies, we've had those that have taken place in clinics and centers, be that university clinics or community clinics, home settings, and then also classroom settings. In terms of how do we get to those developmentally appropriate targets, understanding where the child is now, what their next step would be, and setting the targets and goals for intervention. We have a tool to do that, so we call it the short play and communication evaluation. Talk a little bit about it later for some of our remote work. But we had this, built this with teachers initially who came to us and said, well, I want to be able to set goals across these different domains, but I'm not necessarily the one who does that type of evaluation in the school setting, and I have to wait quite a long time to get those results from some other practitioner who comes into the classroom to assess the kids. So we wanted to give practitioners and educators a short, accessible tool that they could use to collect their own data, to again set those initial intervention targets, and then you could also use to assess progress over time. So that's the space. We have a full training and a teachable model on the space, so if you're interested, I can get you more information on this particular tool. All right, but SPACE is one of the tools then that we've used to assess change over time, and looking to see if we do have effects in these community trials where either families are learning to deliver the intervention from often community coaches, or educators are learning to deliver the intervention within their setting. And so we have a good number of studies listed there. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to share them with you, where we do see increases in those core skills: time jointly engaged, initiations of social communication, play level and diversity, and then importantly, the adults' implementation of the intervention. So in terms, again, of that research evidence, this is a little bit of a array of a few of the NDBIs to give you a sense of where it sits under that umbrella. And so for JASPER, this is a little outdated. I think we have a couple more to throw in this bubble now, but over 600 children across 11 different randomized trials. I think there's a couple hundred more kids across a couple of bigger trials that have come out in the last couple of years. And then in terms of coaching families in the caregiver-mediated model, 4 randomized trials, almost 300 kids. There's lots of mixed effects in the caregiver-mediated literature across the NDBIs, so it's nice to see that we have some consistent findings for JASPER. So loads of different articles, as I mentioned. If you are interested, I'm happy to share any of these. Some are with families. Again, some are in schools with educators. Some are focused specifically on that population of limited language, pre-verbal or minimally verbal children. And again, across those different studies, we see pretty consistent outcomes across those core domains that we've been talking about. Some questions that we get. So is JASPER used only for one-on-one therapy? No. So we can use that again in preschool, small groups, or we've also been in toddler classrooms where we have more than one child in the mix. Can we use this in classroom settings? Yes, we can embed within classroom instruction. We have tried that out as an adaptation, as well as delivering individual one-to-one instruction. Is JASPER appropriate for children with more significant delays? Yes, so we have a number of trials on kiddos who have limited language or school-age children who would be considered minimally verbal. And there's a couple of new studies out in the last couple of years focused specifically on this population. Can you use JASPER with children who use AAC? Yes, please. We welcome all communication modalities. So to date, typically kids are using speech generating devices that are tablet-based, but we welcome all forms of AAC and are happy to assist clinicians in adapting the communication strategies so that we can support multiple communication modalities. All right. So what do the strategies look like? So there's a lot. I won't lie that it's a bit of a complex package of intervention strategies. And so we kind of frame it up as this layer cake because we do teach it in this way, that we think of our base and that foundation, again, to help kids get connected and engaged as being our environment and the way that we set up how we're oriented to the child, the materials that we're selecting that would be a match to the child's developmental level and their interests, how we bring in additional materials to kind of mix up and expand what we call play routines. Central to this is the adult having an active role, again, as the play partner. So imitation and modeling are some of your first strategies that you would learn to be that active partner in the play and keep that conversation going as we develop, again, these play routines that we're going to expand and change over time, and within which you're going to layer our language strategies, including some opportunities for more explicit instruction and support through programming for communication. And then you see up top, kind of by that candle, supporting engagement and regulation. And this is kind of a floating section of additional strategies, core and conditional strategies, where kind of as needed and based on the individual needs of that child, we're crafting a plan to support their engagement and regulation so that we can work on all of these other different domains of skills within our interaction. So it's too much for us to get through. We do have a much longer introductory training that you can participate in, both remotely and in-person models. So I'm happy to give more information if you want to really dive into the specific strategies. But I'll give you a couple of video examples so you can just get a flavor of what it is that we're talking about. And so this first clip is of a kiddo who is pre-verbal. He's a little bit younger, and he's working at this combination play level of building and stacking.
On ice cream. On ice cream. On ice cream. Scoop. Scoop up the ice cream. Scoop up. Scoop. He screams. Ooh. Scoop up.
So they're creating what we would call a base routine with that ice cream. They're stacking those pieces together, taking turns back and forth. He's kind of attempting to imitate the words that she's using, and she's responding and expanding his communication. And then she's looking to add some new steps to that routine because we can only stack them for so long, right? Before kiddo is bored, not interested, unengaged. So she adds that next step of scooping off the ice cream and sticking it on the cake. He doesn't really follow it the first time, he puts it back. And so she playfully kind of tries it again. She models again, putting that ice cream on the cake. And then he seems to kind of get into it after a couple of models and they can carry on that step together. So routines are going to have a lot of these connected steps. So they're kind of making a story together around these materials. So a lot of thought and consideration goes into your toy choice in kind of thinking about what are the possible ways that we could connect these different ideas at the child's developmental level that would make sense to them, and then following in on any ideas that they bring to the table along the way. Maybe he wants to stack those scoops upside down, or he wants to stick a cake piece in it or something else. And so whenever the child gives us one of those productive initiations, then we're going to follow in on their ideas. So I think that's the tricky part for us as adults, that we also have to stay super flexible and responsive in the moment so that we are able to follow in and notice when kiddos offer those great ideas and help them kind of connect the dots so they can make their own story. And then I'll show you a second kiddo. So this is someone who's a little bit older, has more complex language, and is playing at that higher symbolic level. So you'll see a lot of the same strategies apply, just looks a little different since we're playing and talking at a different level.
Watch movie. Good idea. I really want to see Frozen 2. Oh, sure. What do you want to watch? I want to watch Angry Birds 2. Oh, Angry Birds 2. That's a good one. Okay. Where's the TV? I think this one is the back. Great idea. This could be the TV. Oh, sure. Okay, then where's the remote control? Oh, yeah, you're right. We need the remote control. That's the couch. Our TV. Oh, here's our remote control. Boop. And I'll turn the volume up. Perfect. This is so funny. I love Angry Birds too. This is funny. Hey, I made you some popcorn. Oh, thanks. Where's my water? I'm thirsty. Oh, I'll get you some water. Hold on 1 second. Here you go. Mmm. I love popcorn. Popcorn and I'm full. Oh, you are? Okay. Don't eat any more then. That was a great movie. Yeah, let's watch Frozen. Oh, good idea. Boo.
All right. So you can see lots of different actions happening at that symbolic play level. We're pretending that things are something other than they are. So we have like little tube pieces as remotes. I think the couch is a TV, or the tile is. There's a popcorn bucket made out of tiles. And those dolls have life. They're the ones who are watching Frozen and laughing about it and handing each other drinks, etc. So a lot of the same strategies apply. The adult is very responsive to the child's communication. They're not talking all the time. They're giving a lot of space for the child to either respond to something that the adult has said, or better yet, show us a new idea, initiate something that she wants to tell us about and advance that story. Okay, So further thinking about implementation, when we are in settings like homes and classrooms, we are thinking about those adults as the focal change makers for their kiddos. And so tied to, again, this idea of engagement as the foundation for us to advance children's communication skills. This is a paper from Dr. Shi where she has demonstrated that joint engagement is the mechanism of the JASPER intervention getting us to those initiations of joint attention and predicting to children's language outcomes. So we know that adults' delivery of this intervention is important in how we get kids connected and engaged so that we can get that change and move to communication outcomes. So we've done a little bit of work to see to what degree do adults have to deliver the intervention and what level of quality in order for us to see some of that change for kids. And so we have some preliminary data with caregivers of kiddos who are minimally verbal that when the caregivers are delivering JASPER kind of as a whole intervention package with at least 75% fidelity, that's associated with their children's spontaneous communication outcomes. If they're delivering less than that, then we don't see that same link to communication. So we have some signal that we need to do this decently well, at least 75%, in order for us to see a link to children's outcomes. So that's made us think a little bit more about our implementation strategies. How can we help adults in the community who want to deliver the intervention to do that really well so that we can see those outcomes for kids? And so this is work that we have started to do and are venturing further into to look at these different component implementation strategies, things like coaching, having online materials, having access to video feedback, etc., as different implementation strategies to help the adults learn to implement JASPER with high quality. And so if we think about our caregiver-mediated JASPER model, what do those implementation strategies look like? So traditionally in the in-person model, that's really heavy on that live feedback and practice coaching type of strategy. We have a brief kind of check-in, little bit of information about the key topic for the day based on kind of a paper handout that has a lot of visuals and a little bit of information for that the caregiver can review. And then we jump right into supporting the caregiver to use those strategies with their child live and in color. And so that's the bulk of the session, with then a brief kind of debrief and some planning for the next session at the end of their time together. And so before, we were all forced to go into this lovely world of Zoom and do everything remotely because of the pandemic. We had started to think about how could we move into this kind of remote delivery space, and in particular, to support caregivers with their young children to better increase access to the intervention. And so we've learned along the way that remotely, we can support both community practitioners who want to learn the intervention to deliver it just as well as when they're being supported in person. And then for caregivers, that they can learn a good amount of the strategies, they make significant gains, and we see gains in their children's time jointly engaged with them when we support them with remote coaching. We've done some more work to think about how could we make other materials available online for families. And so we've engaged with caregivers and with practitioners, largely here in the Pacific Northwest bit of the United States. And so they gave us a lot of great feedback in helping us to develop some online modules. And so we now have an online program for parents where at this point, it's all in English. We're hoping to make other language adaptations in the future. But the bulk of, or the entirety of the JASPER intervention strategies and the core domain components are here for families. Some things that they taught us were that they really liked that material is self-paced, that they can listen to it or they can read it. They have different options in how they access it. They liked those little dots at the bottom that show them how much progress they're making. And at the end of each module, there's a downloadable kind of visual handout so they can see the key components from each of those modules and kind of gather those over time. In terms of revisions, of which we've made many based on their feedback and many other participants to date, we have what we call knowledge checks. They're like multiple choice, true or false questions. This was the most controversial thing, that some folks loved it and they wanted even more of those. And then some folks told us, the moment I see those, I shut down and I would just quit right here. I don't want to see these. So we've made them optional to hopefully give different ways, again, to engage. You can skip them entirely or you can do them if you love them. They also let us know that they needed the why for each of those strategies and content areas moved right to the front of the module. So we've tried to preload that right at the front so that you understand why it is that this is important for children and why we are doing this specific thing. And then we're still working to add even more video examples because we can never have enough video examples. All right. So this online program, as we've developed it, is largely self-directed. We've tested it now with what we call a check-in call, which is a 20-minute discussion call with an interventionist. So there's no live coaching thus far, but we recognize that some folks might need more than that. So our initial question that we've tested recently in a randomized waitlist controlled pilot study is whether or not access to that online self-directed material plus a 20-minute check-in call for 12 weeks compared to waiting to access that service would support caregivers' learning and then children's, both time jointly engaged and their initiations of social communication. So we're looking from entry to their exit at 12 weeks, again, between those randomized to immediate intervention or randomized to the wait list. Everybody on the wait list then did get the full intervention after that. So we had 49 caregiver child dyads in this study. Kids were about 56 months on average. We had 28 of our 49 kiddos who were pre or minimally verbal at entry, and a fairly diverse set of families who came from all different parts of the US since we were remote and could see them that way. So we were online together for 12 weeks. We did assessments at entry, halfway at 6 weeks, 12 weeks, and then a 16-week follow-up. This is a little bit of what that online program looks like. So families see this initial dashboard with a little car when you're just starting out. The check marks appear as you click off each of those different sections. So each module starts with learning objectives. So you have a sense of where we're going and why we're doing this. And then each page has an illustration or graphic of some point, and then a section of text, again, that you could read or that you could listen to. Those are the knowledge checks, the controversial ones. Test your knowledge if you like, skip it if you don't. Lots of video examples. We try to have examples, again, of a littler kiddo earlier in their learning, and then a little bit older child who has some more complex skills. And then these handouts are either key concepts or worksheets or both. All right, so we had a couple of different measures for this study. We had shipped these assessment kits to the families, so there was a standard set of materials for everybody to use. For the 10-minute caregiver-child interaction, they're just asked to play together with those materials, and they can add 3 things from home. That's where we're getting caregivers implementation fidelity and then kiddos time jointly engaged. And then we did that space assessment that I mentioned earlier. Takes about 15 to 20 minutes. There was a researcher on the call to guide the caregiver through some of the prompts and putting out the different materials. Otherwise, caregivers just there to be responsive to their child. And that's where we're getting initiations of social communication from. When we look at caregivers implementation fidelity, so those who are in immediate online JASPER are in orange, and then the wait list is in blue. And we see significant gains for those who are in the immediate intervention in how they deliver the strategies with their child. And then for kids, similar picture, we see greater time jointly engaged, significantly different than those who are waiting. Same thing for initiations of social communication, greater for those in immediate intervention, significantly different than those on the wait list. So we have some signal for remote delivery and a lot of self-directed material, which is really exciting. We don't have any coaching in this particular study. So that's some of our questions and next steps are kind of what other implementation strategies would help to augment this largely self-directed material. There are families who are going to need more support, and we see that maybe by that 6-week mark, we might be able to identify who is moving along well and could continue with just the self-directed access, and then identify those who might need additional support. And then we're thinking about now, okay, what could we test to provide that additional support? All right, so I know it's a whirlwind. Thanks for your attention and your time. I have some questions from you that I will get to next. Otherwise, if you have other questions, would love to hear from you. So my contact information is at the bottom there. And that's just a few of the lovely folks in my lab who contribute to all of the great work that we do here in Oregon. So thanks for your time. All right, so thanks for these questions that you submitted. I'm looking at a list of 3. So first question is, does the JASPER methodology differ depending on the age of the child? So yes, we talked briefly about how the duration of the session might differ. It might also differ who we have involved. So for younger kids, typically, we're engaging caregivers in that caregiver-mediated model. Once kids are in school, we might also be accessing educators, so they could be implementers as well. I think the main thing that's going to differ is that for all kids, kind of regardless of their chronological age, we're looking to see where are they developmentally in each of those different early domains of skills that we're looking to target within the intervention. So as long as those particular goals and skills are still relevant for the child, you could consider implementing the intervention. Something that might change then if I have an 8-year-old versus a 2-year-old is definitely my toy or activity selection, that I'm going to look for materials, and this can be kind of tricky. We have to get creative sometimes, that would be a match roughly to their chronological age, and be interesting to them and not too babyish if I'm seeing an 8-year-old, but at the same time a match to their developmental level. And often that's a lot of building and stacking. So we might have more sophisticated building and stacking toys, action figures, etc., versus more of the like toddler preschool types of toys. For number 2, can the JASPER methodology be provided by parents or educators in a kindergarten? So yes, definitely. We have those both adaptations. So caregivers oftentimes we're seeing in the home setting, and educators then in the classroom, be that again for one-to-one direct delivery of JASPER or embedded into their classroom activities or potentially with small groups of kids. And 3, can the JASPER methodology be combined with other approaches? Yeah, so oftentimes, again, kids are receiving loads of other services, so we're seeing JASPER kind of working in the context of this array of services that kids have. We have a couple of studies, one ongoing right now, where we're looking to kind of put JASPER in a package with other types of interventions and supports, kind of as best assessed by the clinical team across multiple sites, to see if we can augment or maximize children's progress for those who might have been a slower responder to JASPER or another type of initial intervention. So we tried that initial intervention for, let's say, 10 weeks. We've assessed. We're saying that we're not seeing as much progress as we would like to see. And so looking as a second stage intervention, can we put this kind of best assessed package that may include JASPER, and what we're referring to as combined and enhanced treatment at this point. But that's TBD. Still working on that one actively in studies right now. Thanks for your questions.